is in crisis. And people are looking for hope and answers. Thai PBS World is there with you with the best minds of the day. Join us on Thai PBS World tonight, every weekdays at 7 p.m. Thai PBS World, we bring Thailand to the world.
To Thai PBS World tonight, I am Tulipnak Sopoplau and you also with Thepachayong.
Okay, good evening. If we are to believe what Prime Minister Prayut has to say about the situation he is in, it appears that he seems to be fed up with the things that he has been facing, right? And given the right conditions, he might be willing to step aside. But of course, he has made it clear that there are still a number of conditions attached to that scenario, right?
Well, every time we have a chance, it sounds like he's quite tired. And there are a number of occasions that he actually said that he doesn't want to be the Prime Minister.
All right. And once again, he did say that.
Once again, he said something similar to that. The Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha during the opening ceremony at the Thailand National Defense College. He said he hopes there will be a better and more honest person than him coming to do this Prime Minister's job. He said that having this power, taking up this responsibility, is not fun. So he was speaking for about an hour long, but we will give you an interesting bit of that. Let's take a listen.
ไม่เคยคิดว่าต้องมายืนตรงนี้นะไม่เคยคิดว่าตรงนี้มัน6 ปีแล้วทำไมมันถึงตรงนี้ได้ยังไงเนี่ยเนาะแล้วทุกคนคงเข้าใจนะถ้าเราไม่เข้าใจกันก็ไปยากผมก็หวังยิ่งกว่าวันหน้ามีคนที่เขาเก่งกว่าผมที่เขาดีกว่าผมที่เขาซื่อสัตย์กว่าผมซื่อสัตย์เหมือนผมที่เขาทำงานเราดีกว่า
So this event is actually close to the outside media. It was not allowed to attend the event, but a video clip recorded of the speech was released on YouTube by the National Defense College itself. In the speech, Prayut said that the country's educational system was not bad, but it focused far too much on academics, when people should be educated about patriotism, history, and loyalty. And he wrapped up the speech by saying that he does not understand why people keep saying he has exploited his power when he has done everything according to law. Was an interesting speech.
That's right. So in fact, what General Prayut thinks is one thing, but the reality is that there are still a lot of discontentments out there on the streets. And in the next 2 weeks, there will be at least 2 major protests awaiting his government. And the government is certainly bracing for a major anti-government rally scheduled for this Sunday at the Democracy Monument. And at the same time, the students who are unhappy with existing school regulations and are demanding reform of the education are also planning another protest later this month. Officials from various government agencies dealing with security met this morning at the government house to discuss contingency plans to cope with the protest this Sunday. A senior police officer later told reporters that at least 300 policemen will be mobilized to handle security around the government house. The seat of the government has been a target of recent anti-government rallies. So the officials concerned have to make sure that this will not be repeated, or if repeated, will be handled properly. Protest leaders acting under the name Rasadon Group have vowed to resume their street protests to further highlight their demands, which include the resignation of Prime Minister Prayut, a new constitution, and a reform of the monarchy. And today, student activists who have been demanding an education reform and the revision of draconian school regulations announced they will stage another rally on November the 21st to again air their grievances. They have yet to decide on the venue of their rally. They faulted Education Minister Nattapon Thipsuwan for not having seriously acted on their demands, despite pledges given by him during their previous talks. They reiterated that Nattapon should step down if he cannot address what the students want. The student activists have been holding a series of protests to press demands for a reform of the education system and relaxing school regulations on uniforms and hairstyles. They are also demanding more freedom of expression on the campus and an end to corporal punishments.
However, we have Mr. Nattapon on our show before, a couple of weeks ago, I believe, and he was talking about the reform. He said there have been some research done, there's some process ongoing about it, but I guess it's not fast enough, it's not quick enough. And today, actually, there was an announcement calling for the protest today, late afternoon, but then it was called off. The protest said it has to be at the Mabun Krong department store. And suddenly there is another announcement said that they have to call that one off because they're not sure who is behind this call for gatherings. That is very interesting.
That's right, quite interesting. The fact that a rally was scheduled and then later called off on the grounds that nobody was going to handle the rally. So
I guess because they have so many fractions between the protesters and sometimes they have to make sure who's actually behind which one.
But what is certain is that this Sunday there will be another major rally at the Democracy Monument. We have been hearing these talks about national reconciliation for a few weeks now. The idea was proposed by the leader of the Democrat Party for a committee to be set up to discuss possible solutions to the ongoing crisis. And the opposition has been quite lukewarm toward the idea, but the protest leaders have made it clear that they don't want anything to do with it. But today, House Speaker, who is also Parliament President Chuan said he is determined to go ahead with the reconciliation process to find a solution to the ongoing conflict. He said he intends to bring representatives from all sectors of the society together for constructive discussions to find ways out of the crisis. And they include anti-government protesters as well. Chuan explained that he has invited some of the former prime ministers to join the reconciliation process because their views would be useful to the efforts. They include Kun Anand Panyalachun, General Chawrit Yongchayut, Apisit Vechachiwa, Somchai Wongsawat, and General Surayut Yulanun, who is currently president of the Privy Council. Chuan said these former leaders have had experiences going through similar political conflicts. However, Chuan clarified that it does not mean that they would have to sit in the committee. The idea of a reconciliation process was initiated by Democrat Party leader Kun Julin Laksanavisit during an extraordinary parliamentary session to debate the current political crisis late last month. Chuan admitted that getting people to agree to join the proposed committee is easier said than done. The fact that some of the former prime ministers have responded positively to the invitation does not necessarily mean they would join it, but it signals their agreement with this approach to diffusing the potentially explosive situation.
So according to Kun Chuan, Anand, General Chawalit, and Apisit have already accepted the invitation. And Chuan said that he would personally approach General Surayut himself. So some of the former presidents of parliament will also be approached, asked whether it is necessary for the committee to include representatives of the anti-establishment protesters. Chuan said that he wants them to join voluntarily. And he said there is nothing which can be resolved 100%, but if we can solve the issues only partially, it will be beneficial. Anti-government protest leaders have made known their stand against joining the committee, which they dismissed as a delaying tactic to buy time for Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha. Pheu Thai, the main opposition party, initially showed reluctance in being part of the reconciliation committee out of fear it would end up whitewashing the Prayut government. The party, however, later agreed to consider joining the process with some conditions. So Chuan said that he has been told by Sutin Klangseng, the opposition chief whip, that opposition parties are waiting for a clearer picture of the structure and working processes of the committee before making a decision. But if you follow us in the past 1 week, we have a report before that in the past 10 years, we have 3 governments that set up many reconciliation committees, and none has been fruitful.
In fact, because of what you mentioned, the fact that we have had so many so-called reconciliation committees to study ways to guide the country out of conflicts, but too many of them and none of them has really produced any substantial results. So there have been strong doubts as to whether the latest idea about a reconciliation committee would work or not. So that's why opposition parties have been quite sort of rather lukewarm in responding to the invitation to join the process. The protest leaders have said, given a flat no to the idea, and even academics or political scientists have strong skepticism about this whole idea.
Talking about this protest, one thing that's totally different from other protests so far, besides the demand on politics, they also demand for the education reform and also LGBT rights. So we are going to go to this report talking about the rights of LGBT group, that they use this protest as a stage to hear their voice.
Right, it's the freedom of speech, the freedom of living, the freedom of, you don't get killed by being different.
A 26-year-old drag queen, Anchali Pokin Wutipop, joined the anti-establishment protests in September. Demonstrations by Thai youth started in July and initially took aim at Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha, accusing him of clinging to power and harassing opponents. They have also made unprecedented calls to curb the powers of the monarchy, which protesters say have enabled decades of military domination.
หรือว่าเขาจะเป็นเพศอะไรเราเป็นคนเหมือนกัน
เราโกรธตั้งแต่เรื่องสิทธิ LGBT ที่คุณบอกคุณจะให้เราแต่คุณก็ไม่ให้เราโกรธแค้นมากเรื่องตรงนี้ถ้าเกิดคุณทำไม่ได้เมื่อคุณไม่มีปัญญาที่จะบริหารถ้าเกิดคุณไม่มีปัญญาที่จะให้สิ่งที่เราต้องการออกไปค่ะออกไป
Anchali is calling for more than a change of government. She is hoping to advance a drawn-out struggle for same-sex marriage and other LGBT rights in the Southeast Asian nation, alongside broader calls for greater democracy in the country.
ดีค่ะสนุกทุกคนให้ความ participate ก็แบบ
Anchali dropped out of school at the age of 15, leaving her home in Ayutthaya for Bangkok to star in cabaret shows. She started performing in bars in 2018 in Pat Phong area. Her stage name is Angela Anang. Since joining the protests, her monarchist father has chosen to cut ties with her. She rarely sees him and is unable to have a proper conversation with him about gender, identity, and her role in the protests.
แต่ที่เอฟเฟกต์หนูมากที่สุดน่ะก็คือครอบครัวที่เขามันไม่ใช่แค่คอมเมนต์มันคือมันเอฟเฟกต์เพราะว่าความคิดเห็นมันต่างกันมากๆแล้วมันทำให้รู้สึกแย่เพราะว่าเขาเลือกที่จะตัดขาดจากเราเลยอะไรเงี้ยเขาเลือกที่จะแบบอย่างที่เคยทำมาตลอดก็คือแบบว่าใช้ความเผด็จการ
And that's what's going on in Thailand right now. So just so you know, these are the stories we have been following. Thailand reported its latest death from COVID-19, the 60th since the outbreak of the contagion. as 8 new infections were also recorded today. The fatality was a 66-year-old Thai retired civil servant who returned from England on October 19th and entered state quarantine in Chonburi province. Cumulative infections in Thailand to date are 3,818. There has been 1 new recovery, bringing the total recovery to 3,639. 119 are still being treated in hospitals. The 57-year-old French tourist who tested positive for COVID-19 on October 21st has recovered and was discharged from Got Samui Hospital in Surat Thani yesterday. She will have to remain in quarantine at home for 30 days under the supervision of doctors. Meanwhile, local officials said the woman had really recovered and the island was completely free of the COVID-19 virus. The baht opened at 30.78 to the US dollar on Friday, strengthening from 30.88 at close on Thursday. The Thai currency is likely to move between 30.70 and 30.90 today. Amid the US election, the financial market, the dollar fell by 1.1%, while the dollar index reached its lowest level since October 21st. In Thailand, the baht in the short term strengthened in line with other Asian currencies. The 30.80 per US dollar on this morning was the strongest rate since January 28. The Thailand Meteorological Department forecast on Friday that a high-pressure system from China covered upper Thailand, bringing cool weather to the areas with isolated rain, while the northeast monsoon prevails over the Gulf and the south, leading to isolated heavy rain over the lower south. Bangkok and surrounding area will be partly cloudy, with rain in 10% of the areas.
So at this point, we don't know yet who the next president of the United States will be, Donald Trump or Joe Biden. But so far as the results of the vote count suggest, it's quite clear that Joe Biden is having an edge over President Trump. So what does the result of the election would mean to the rest of the world, and what another 4 years under Trump would be like, or 4 years under the new leadership would be like? We will talk to Kun Kantati Supamongkol, a former Foreign Minister of Thailand, who has spent some time lecturing in international affairs in the US. Good evening. Thank you very much for joining us.
Good evening.
Okay. All right.
Yes.
If we look at the trend of the vote count,
Yes.
it's very possible that we will have a new man in the White House
Yes.
January, right?
It is highly likely now.
But would you be surprised if at the end of the day, Joe Biden wins the election?
At the end of the day, I would place my bet that Joe Biden will win. Yes.
So why do you think that Joe? What are the factors, the main factors that you think that help Joe Biden win this election?
Well, many elements. One would be the latest one, and the most devastating one would be the COVID-19. Because Trump's handling of COVID-19 was a disaster. You know, the US and South Korea, the Republic of Korea, had the same amount of virus on the same day at the beginning of the year. And look at what happened, the contrast. The US now over 200,000. And look at Thailand. We have 60.
That's right.
That's the number of deaths. And so Thailand did very well. The U.S. did probably the worst in the world. And the U.S. had all the technologies, all the leading doctors, the CDC, but nevertheless, leadership mattered, and Trump was the leader. And he played the game very badly. Yes.
So to manage the disasters probably depend on the management.
Yes. Yes, especially in the U.S., the person or the president, he needed to take the leadership, and it would have been very easy. He should have just followed the guidance of the doctors and the scientists, and he had the best. Dr. Fauci.
That's right, but he doesn't listen to doctors or science.
Well, he
Anti-science.
in a sense.
In
but
a sense.
You see, he had this erroneous assumption that he could only win if the economy was good.
Right.
And the assumption follows that the only way to get the economy to be good is to have people not locked up at home but go back to work, which means kids must go to school so parents can go to work. And that led to many deaths. And that was why he, when he found out that COVID was not going to go away, his strategy then was to ignore it and to lie about it, to pretend that it didn't exist. And his rallies had cost many lives. In fact, the latest study indicated that his rallies, now this was about beginning 4 weeks ago, cost already about 70,000 new infections.
Oh, that's a lot.
And 700 deaths. And that's at least. That's from
lot.
Johns Hopkins.
Yes. No, but if you look at the popular votes, Trump did get more popular votes than the last time, right? So it must mean that his message, no matter how illogical it may seem, seems to have struck a right chord with many, many Americans, right?
Well, this is it. This is a very curious thing because it does indicate that the country is completely divided and the division is much deeper than we were hoping for. And yes, what I saw about Trump was that the personality was a major problem. It wasn't only the policy, and we can talk about the policy problems, but he was showing something that was a major concern, the way many psychiatrists have already indicated that he had some psychological problems. And it showed, but nevertheless, he had received massive support. And that, of course, was because he picked the right element. Globalization was leading to the widening gap between the rich and the poor. The poor sensed that globalization was not fair to them. And so Trump picked that up. And that was one of the elements that led to the strong support, especially from the working class.
So let's say we can choose between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. Should we go to the devil we know, or should we go to the one we don't know, but we hope it will be better?
Well, the one that we know
He's a real devil.
It's frightening.
Frightening, yes.
Yes,
and can it be more frightening in the next
No, because
4 years?
Joe Biden has been around
Right.
for a long, long time. I assume that when you said the one that we know was Trump, right?
Yes.
Yes. So Joe Biden also is well known because
Right.
he's been in politics for a long time. Trump, on the other hand, just came in.
That's right.
So I think that the country, the U.S. and the world would probably be in more steady hands. Yeah.
What do you think would be the biggest difference that Joe Biden's leadership and compared to Trump? What would be the most significant departure from what Trump has been doing?
Well, I think we will probably see less emphasis on the tweets. We will see less actions based on gut feeling, emotional feelings. We will see a president who would listen to all sides and then digest. We will see a president who will read. Trump doesn't like to read.
Right.
And who will be informed. And who will follow, if you talk about COVID, he will follow the guidance of the leading doctors and scientists. And other policies, I think he will be able to make decisions in a way that a leader should make.
That means going back to the normalcy of American
Yes, you picked the right word because the last 4 years have not been normal. The U.S. had changed rather completely. It's kind of like an old friend that you've been with for a long time suddenly became a different person altogether. And that was what happened. So if you look at what Trump has done in foreign affairs, you would see that he had tried to dismantle what the U.S. had been trying to build since the Second World War. You know, we talk about the liberal international order with multilateral institutions like the United Nations, WTO.
And he has been shunning all those.
Yes, yes. And even more importantly, he had been shunning U.S. traditional allies and been kind of criticizing all of the U.S. friends, but not saying anything negative about President Putin. So that's very unusual.
That's right.
But from what Trump already started, if Joe Biden becomes the president, he cannot just suddenly change everything, right? He has to gradually change towards something more Democrat-like. And I believe, maybe you will agree or not, there will be some kind of, not a politic tour, but a diplomat tour.
Yes, well, definitely. One thing that I noticed is that in America, parents were afraid when their kids would listen to Trump because the way he talked.
Right.
Rudeness, the words that one never used in polite societies is used all the time. No diplomacy. With Biden, you would probably see the return to the U.S. as we have known the U.S. For so many years. But some of the things will take time to correct. For example, one thing that Trump has done which hurt the U.S. rather deeply is the message that the U.S. Is no longer reliable to its friends.
Right.
You know, agreements signed by the U.S. can be ignored by the U.S. Look at what happened in Syria when he suddenly pulled out just because he had a conversation with the president of Turkey and abandoned the group, the Kurds that had been helping the U.S. fight Islamic State, for example. Pulling out of the nuclear deal with Iran when Iran did not violate the agreement at all.
Is there something positive about Donald Trump at all?
Something positive? Well, in a sense, I think he highlights the fact that maybe globalization did ignore the poor, the working class. And maybe it's time for liberal leaders to take a look and to see how they can help the poor more. Don't leave them, aside. So that's one message, and I think Joe Biden has mentioned that already.
I think this is a message that I believe has resonated best among American people.
Yes.
Especially among his supporters, right?
Yes. So that was a problem that Clinton kind of failed to address.
4 years ago?
Yes, 4 years ago. I think Trump was able to pick on that and convince the working class people that they were being ignored and he would protect them. But in actual fact, he didn't. And of course, the other problem with Trump was the lies. I mean, we know the amount of lies. It's incredible, even in the last few hours.
Yeah, that's right.
And to the degree that his own counselor invented the word alternative reality.
That's right.
Alternative fact.
And what message is that for the new generation?
So you're talking about the issue of lies. So why do you think he has been saying telling all these lies, and yet he has been able to get away with them?
Well, and he knew that. He actually said he felt that his supporters would believe whatever he says. And to me, it's kind of like an insult to the supporters. He even mentioned that if he had killed someone in
he said that.
the middle of Fifth Avenue in New York City, his supporters would still support him.
Right.
And that was shocking. But the psychology of lie is that I think he feels that he needs to have a target himself, and it's all about him, And if he needs to, if the reality is not in favor of what he's doing, then he has to lie about it, and he would lie over and over again to make people think that it's the truth.
And that's what he did again this morning when he claimed there was widespread fraud in the vote count without producing any evidence to support his claim.
No evidence at all. But his family, his sons also did the same same thing, and it's very frightening because the U.S. had stood for reliability, morality, leadership of the free world, and then you have a massive change like this.
So I think one thing that good to come out from this is the fact-checking process, because right now all news agencies in U.S. have their own fact-checking department, and they do live fact-check while Donald Trump giving a speech anywhere.
That's right, and it's also contagious because the BBC also does it too across the ocean.
He should be proud to go down history as being the first American president to be fact-checked by the media.
Yes,
around the world,
and to be done very easily.
That's right.
Because he just lies outright when the facts are clear.
That's right.
Yeah.
Blatant lies.
Sometimes I'm shocked, because the lies are could be discovered immediately. That he was lying.
So now that Joe Biden is only a step away from taking over the White House, and according to the latest trend in the vote count, so is there anything we should watch out, especially from Thailand's point of view under Joe Biden leadership?
Well, I think we will see that it's going to be less transactional. So you remember Trump would he's transactional, so he only looks at the trade numbers.
Right.
And he was pressing Thailand as well as others on trying to make sure that the trade is balanced. In this sense, Biden would be less inclined to do so. Now, I feel that Biden will probably lead the U.S. back into the TPP, which is now the CPTPP.
Right.
And it would be good for Thailand to join the TPP as soon as possible. I have actually talked to numerous countries, and there's a willingness for Thailand to join. And so it would be very important because otherwise we would be at a major disadvantage to our trading partners.
And what about issues of human rights, democracies? The people that are looking forward to more sort of pressure from the U.S. under Biden leadership on these issues.
Yes,
more emphasis on this issue, which something that Trump administration has been ignoring.
The Trump administration has been ignoring this issue because Trump himself ignored, because he was, many people have said that he was a dictator worshiper. He looked up at Putin, he looked up at the Turkish leader. So one would expect that Biden would probably go back to being a U.S. which is more has some additional concerns about human rights, about democracy. During the Trump period, he himself didn't care about democracy or human rights, but the bureaucracy, the State Department, still did to a degree.
Right.
But with this change, there will be a revival of a concern to a degree.
So they'll be more active toward Thailand, because I feel like in the past 4 years, Thailand hasn't been didn't get that much attention from U.S. And we were included in Indo-Pacific policy.
Yes, Indo-Pacific policy is an interesting thing because it was first actually introduced by an ASEAN member as well as Japan. The U.S. then picked it up with Secretary Tillerson. But in the Indo-Pacific policy or strategy is still a bit unclear.
Right.
And of course, we would like ASEAN to be at the heart of this strategy. So this is an area that Thailand and ASEAN should work actively with a Biden administration.
Under Trump leadership, I mean, it's quite clear that the U.S. Seems to have put pressure on countries in this region to take sides. Either you're with the U.S. or you are with China, right?
Yes.
I think that's the message is quite clear, especially in most recent months when Mike Pompeo, I mean, has been talking about the new dictatorship, the tyranny.
Well, Mike Pompeo had used very strong words against China. Back to the Cold War.
That's right. Describing the Communist Party of China as a new tyranny, right? And urging countries in the free world, including Thailand, of course, to take sides. So you think, of course, I mean, we don't expect Biden to take that kind of aggressive posturing toward China, but Biden cannot depart very much from the U.S. Stand toward China, right? As was under Trump.
Yes, the relationship between the U.S. and China have some structural problems that has to be addressed. The practice of China regarding trade to a degree, regarding technology, U.S. the transfer of technology that they required U.S. companies to do so inside China. So those structural elements probably will have to be addressed. But they won't be the emotional dealing with the Chinese. I think it would be better thought out.
Okay. The language used would not be that as aggressive.
Yes. And the other thing is that Trump's "Make America Great Again" actually meant make Trump great.
Right.
But in addition to that, it isolated the U.S. The U.S. abandoned allies. With Biden, I think they will be the approach to rebuild the alliance. Because in our world today, a U.S. acting alone like that is not as effective as the U.S. being backed and supported by allies.
Right.
You just came back from the U.S. after having spent some years there. Right?
Yes.
So what are your friends back there saying about the election?
Well, they were concerned for their physical being, physical safety, because Trump, and even today, one of his sons tweeted that Trump wants to go all out with war. He's been
fight to the death, he said.
He's been encouraging his supporters to use violence.
Right.
The words that he used: liberate Michigan, liberate Virginia. Liberate is a very violent word, and it's been scary. So. And to the radical right, the white supremacist group, he said, stand by. And that was a message for them to be prepared to use violence. And he had already built up this false feeling that the elections would be fraudulent,
Right.
only if he loses.
Yes.
Now, can you imagine that? A leader saying,
right,
if I lose, then it's fraudulent election. If I win, then it's fine. I mean, now, with that, I have talked to quite a few of my friends in the U.S., and they have been telling me about people having to hire extra security guards now, this week. Places are boarded up.
Right.
In Beverly Hills, stores are boarded up. So they're expecting actually the worst.
So they think that there might be another riot, and there
there is
actually
a
already
risk.
protests
Yes.
already going
Yes.
on right now.
Yeah.
So it all depends on Trump handles the aftermath of the election, right? If he continues to be provocative as he has been, I mean, then troubles that we fear will happen, will certainly happen. Right?
Yes, and the U.S. has another problem with the process, of elections process. If once the elections is decided, once we know the results, the person in the White House, the president, if he loses, he still remains in office for another 10 weeks.
That's
Right.
right. Yeah.
That's a very long time for someone who has lost the election
right.
to be in office. In the UK, it's overnight.
That's
they
right.
have
That's right. So that means that Trump will be in a position to do things unthinkable. Right?
Still would be. Still would be.
given Trump being Trump. I mean,
Yes, except for the fact that I've noticed that some of the Republicans are backing away from him
Yeah.
now.
Right.
And when he made that amazing speech that you mentioned at the beginning, with many lies about the elections, and he declared himself victorious already.
that's right. Yeah.
You would notice that Vice President Pence was nowhere to be seen.
That's right.
That's
Yes.
true.
So that's an indication that Republicans are now backing away from him. Yeah.
So, final question. So, what do you think countries like Thailand can learn from what has been happening in the U.S. since Trump came to power?
Well, I think it's Thailand must look at the political process. I think that's very important. You know, so we must ensure that we have a constitution which would lead to a peaceful and very good future. You know, the U.S. Constitution we have noticed had some problems, and the U.S. Constitution allowed a person like Trump to come in the first place and to stay for 4 years. And so this is a lesson in politics that we have to no longer assume that the U.S. is a perfect example.
Right.
You see? And so maybe we can become a leader. Well, one thing for sure, Thailand succeeded so well with COVID that we became one of the world's leaders in how to fight, on how to fight COVID. So the message that we should take home is that we should be confident about ourselves and also look at how we approach policy in a comprehensive way.
All right. So,
Okay, and that's all the time we have in this edition of Thai PBS World. But you can follow us on Twitter, on Facebook, on our website, that you will get all the update you need to know what's happening in Thailand and also around the world.
so thank you very much for joining us tonight.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
สวัสดีค่ะ
สวัสดีครับ
สวัสดี